Recent polling released by NBC News shows only 22% of Americans have confidence in the U.S. Supreme Court. In the wake of that growing unpopularity, a new proposal in Congress would amend the Constitution to implement 18-year term limits on Supreme Court justices. Other similar proposals have failed to gain traction in Congress throughout the years. Maryland Democratic Congressman Johnny Olszewski joins me now. He is the lawmaker proposing this bill. Congressman, it's so great to see you in my old stomping grounds. What makes your proposal different from past attempts, I wonder, to implement term limits?
Thanks, Mija. It's great to be with you. And what I will say is this is a very straightforward constitutional amendment to really address that confidence crisis that we're facing with the Supreme Court right now. This is a proposal that will cap all terms to 18 years, something that is overwhelmingly supported not just by Americans, but by Republicans, Democrats, and independents alike. It's something that I hope that my colleagues on both sides of the aisle will step forward and address, given the upending of decades of precedents, given the ethical concerns that we've seen with the Supreme Court, and given the political gamesmanship that we've seen with and around appointments.
And Congressman, given what we just heard about that low percentage of Americans who have confidence in the U.S. Supreme Court, do you think that there's a bigger appetite from the public to have more term limits right now?
Yeah, I hear overwhelmingly from my constituents, I think especially around the Supreme Court, a desire to see term limits. I know that term limits are widely supported generally, something I support personally in other cases as well. But what I can say is, in the case of Congress, I personally have to stand before the voters every 2 years to justify returning to the United States Congress. And I think the voters in November will send a resounding message that they are not supportive of the Republican policies and practices that this Congress has enacted. Unfortunately, we don't have that possibility with the Supreme Court. And so when they gut a woman's right to choose, when they undo decades of hard-fought civil rights gains, there's nothing that the American people can do. And it's especially frustrating when you see these justices rubbing shoulders with the president at state dinners, going on Fox News, and also taking lavish trips with individuals who have business before the court. I think it's important that we act, and this is a common sense, straightforward way to address those concerns.
But what about among your colleagues in Congress? Do you see a realistic path of support for this or any other similar reform for the high court?
Yeah, I mean, ethics reform for the court, not just having a code of ethics, but actually something that's enforceable, I think is really important too. And what I will say is, I know that constitutional amendments as a former American government teacher are very hard to pass. But what I will say is this is just far too important for us not to try. I've already heard from several members of Congress who are following up with our office and joining this constitutional amendment now that it's been introduced. I look forward to working with my colleagues, again, on both sides of the aisle. This is not meant to be a partisan reform. This is really addressing that confidence crisis that's out there that you pointed out at the top with the public polling and the lack of confidence in the Supreme Court.
And Congressman, I want to shift to funding for the Secret Service because Republicans on the Senate Judiciary Committee are pushing to include $1 billion for the service into its planned reconciliation package to fund ICE and CBP. It would fund security adjustments and upgrades at the White House, including for the East Wing Ballroom. Do you support the inclusion of those additional funds?
I support funding the Secret Service, just as I supported efforts to make sure that we opened up the rest of Homeland Security. The bill that we ultimately passed last week, that was passed twice by the Senate through unanimous consent and was supported by the president. I will not give a dime for ICE without reforms. And I led a law enforcement agency as Baltimore County executive before coming to Congress, and we had common sense reforms. We had body-worn cameras. We did de-escalation. We didn't conduct police activities in sensitive locations like schools and churches. I can't even get my Republican colleagues to agree to not deport American citizens. And so I'm open to the conversations of funding other agencies, but not a penny without those reforms that I think are so necessary. And again, also overwhelmingly supported by the American people.
Understood. Thank you, Congressman. And before I let you go, since you do sit on the House Foreign Affairs Committee, some of your fellow Democrats have called for Trump administration officials, including Secretary of State Rubio, to testify about the U.S. strategy toward Iran. Is that something you want to hear from the administration as well? And are there any hearings planned?
Absolutely want to see Secretary Rubio, Steve Witkoff, Jared Kushner come before the Foreign Affairs Committee and talk about what is the strategy for ending this war? What is the diplomatic approach to how that we actually stop Iran from becoming a nuclear armed country? How do we take our troops out of harm's way? How do we stop the tens of billions of dollars of cost to the taxpayer? We know that we are paying for this with lives lost through our troops at the gas pump and through surcharges on things like Amazon. We're paying for it with the billions of dollars being asked for. And it's really astonishing to me that as a member of the Foreign Affairs Committee, there has not been a single public hearing with any of the administration officials. One of the most important things that's happening, not just in America, but the world. And they can't be bothered to have a conversation with us and with the American people. I think it speaks to a lack of respect, both to Congress, but also to Americans, not just here, but we're unfortunately something we're seeing in other places as well.
All right, Congressman Johnny Olszewski, thank you for so much of your time today.